do início, por favor, pedimos para que se atentem às orientações a seguir. Lembrem-se de colocar seus celulares e equipamentos eletrônicos no modo silencioso. Não é permitido que sejam consumidos alimentos e nem bebidas no interior do auditório. O limite máximo de público é de 150 pessoas. Este auditório possui lugares reservados para cadeirantes e para pessoas com deficiência auditiva e visual. É proibido fumar em todos os ambientes da FGV, conforme Lei Federal nº 12.546 de 2011. Em caso de falta de energia, as luzes acenderão automaticamente. O espaço possui saídas de emergência sinalizadas, com portas equipadas com barras antipânico que possibilitam a saída do local com segurança. Para abrir a porta, basta empurrar a barra. Este ambiente conta com equipamentos de prevenção e combate a incêndio, como detectores de fumaça, extintores e hidrantes. Em caso de emergência, a brigada de incêndio será acionada para ajudar. Siga as orientações da brigada de incêndio. Ao ouvir os alarmes ou mensagens de emergência, mantenha a calma, evite pânico e confusão. Em caso de incêndio, não use o elevador. Desça pelas escadas de emergência. Para maior segurança, este auditório é monitorado por circuito fechado de TV. Antes de sair, confira seus pertences para não deixar nada para trás. A FGV não se responsabiliza por objetos deixados ou esquecidos nos auditórios ou em suas dependências.
Antes de darmos início ao evento, gostaríamos de reforçar o seguinte disclaimer. As manifestações expressas por integrantes dos quadros da Fundação Getúlio Vargas e por convidados que participam dos eventos e transmissões online representam exclusivamente as opiniões dos seus autores e não refletem, necessariamente, a posição institucional da FGV. Este evento poderá coletar seus dados pessoais e registrar sua imagem e voz por meio de vídeos, respeitando as leis aplicáveis. Você poderá deixar de participar do evento. Em caso de dúvidas, entre em contato com a FGV pela aba de proteção de dados no portal.fgv.br. Agradecemos sua participação e desejamos um excelente evento.
Good morning. You are very welcome to our Getúlio Vargas Foundation, to our 8th workshop on new developmentalism. This is a traditional workshop that we organize once a year. And when we want to discuss topics related to our theory, yes, to the new developmentalism theory, to improvements and debates and ideas about the core, let's see, the core of the theory, okay? Surely we are also open to new ideas, to other fields, other topics that we are not treating specifically until now. So when you hope you learn about the new developmentalism, and you can also improve our understanding about the middle income countries and the development processes, okay, of those economies. So we have a schedule that we beginning with our master, Bresser-Pereira, that will teach first your class, and with a new point that he developed a new idea, and then he will present for you about political economy, I can say that, yes. And then you have another roundtables. We have roundtables at the end. Okay, we have Jayat Ghosh, that is our special lecturer. Thanks for coming, Jayat. And thanks for everybody that accepted to come to join us here. And so to be brief, Tiago will say some words and then we start, okay? Thanks for everybody for coming, and you have here to take any kind of doubts or any kind of arrangement about the logistics here, okay? Thank you.
Thank you, Nelson. I'll be brief also. We're very happy to have everyone here. In the last days, we had some issues in São Paulo, a cyclone, so many people got problems to come, and we are happy that most of them could make. A special thanks to André. He's not here yet, but André Nassif, he faced a lot of issues to come here, and he made his way. He'll be here. So we're very happy to have everyone. New friends, but also people that are working with Professor Bresser and New Developmentalism for a long time that help developing this theory. So we're very happy to have Carmem, Eliane, Araujo, Missio, Danilo. Special thanks to Jayati. We're so happy to have you here. Also, thanks for many people that helped to organize this event every year. Mateus, João, José, people from GCOM, thank you very much, from CAV. Also, I want to thank a lot Rede de Pesquisa of FGV, who helped finance this event, FAPESP, and also YSI-INET. I will have to show a little bit, to speak a little bit about YSI, who is a major partnership of the event. And I just want to say that, can I share the screen? I just want to say that this is, for us, is very important. It's very hard to have people developing own ideas in the global south, and I think Professor Bresser is an example. Eu vou botar. So I think Professor Bresser started to develop original ideas in the global south. This is very important. It's hard to do this. And so we invite people also with original thinking. That's why we invited Jayat this year, because it's very important to do so. And YSI helps also this type of community with heterodox thinking. So I want to thank a lot Jay, Hesk, and Manuel from YSI, who have been a strong partnership for us. Just a quick view on YSI. It's a community for young scholars and heterodox thinking. It's all over the world. We have a huge community in Brazil and Latin America, but it's all over the world. This year, we had 3,000 new members. We had 150 new events, 120, close to 120 virtual events. We are, I want to show this graph. We are basically these communities from the global south. So if you see there, 75% of the YSI is from the global south, and this is very important. We have gender balance as well. And for those that are new and don't know the community, there are many different working groups, so you can also enroll in different working groups related to your research, right? So there's a working group, there's people working in Africa and East Asia, in Latin America, in economic development, and so on and so forth. So I invite you to visit the website that I left here, and I'm open also to, and there's many people. Danilo here is also a major partner of YSI, and we are open to discuss and introduce you more. But yeah, that's it. Now I pass the floor for our key speaker, Professor Bresser. Please, the floor is yours. It's an honor to have you opening the event.
I decided to speak about a political economy class. I decided to have a political economy class, and I began by inventing a word, geosociology, because então our theme is the geosociology of the periphery and the empire. The struggle of countries and social class for the economic surplus. Well, geosociology is the study of geopolitics intermediated by social classes. No? This very simple definition. It involves the peripheral countries, China, India for sure, social classes, the empire, the group of countries, the rich countries led by the American empire. Geosociology is rather approach than a science. It's a mere approach. The social class that we discuss here, there is a struggle of the social classes, not the traditional class struggle. So I am not willing to come back to the workers and the capitalists, Marx approach. Instead, you have the struggle among multiple classes, including a new managerial class. The key countries and the social class that you will deal. The empire, the peripheral countries, the empire-dependent elites. Now comes the social class, the empire-dependent elite, rentier financier sector, the independent elite, a very small portion, the alienated middle class, the independent middle class, the working class, and the râlé, the marginalized underclass. I will speak about each one, a few words. In the middle class, we should distinguish the upper middle class, where you have the managerial class, the liberal and professional upper middle class, and the bourgeois upper middle class. Second, we have the knowledge middle class. And third, we have the lower middle class. That's a very large. We also should distinguish the working class from the marginalized. That is the râlé. Now the country classification. We have the empire. The empire is the US and the empire-associated rich countries. The peripheral pseudo-associated elites, such as countries. Sorry, the peripheral pseudo-associated countries, such as Argentina, Pakistan, Brazil. The independent peripheral countries, such as India, Malaysia, and Turkey. China and Russia, that's a special case, which have a limited presence in Latin America. Dependent peripheral countries. That's us. The empire-dependent peripheral countries. These are the countries that have submitted themselves to the empire. They are legitimized by the associated dependency theory. Dependency, no dependence. Associated dependency theory, which views them as associates of the empire. They are not associates, they are dependent, subordinated. The development strategy is dictated by the empire, essentially adopting economic liberalism. Yet, no peripheral country has industrialized by adopting economic liberalism. All countries that are developing in the story of humanity, including Britain in the 18th century and beginning of the 19th, they were under developmentalism, not economic liberalism. Because it is the empire, because economic liberalism is the empire's main tool to impede the periphery's development. The empire does not want, I will come back, go back to this. It's not only not interested, he does not want we to grow. Empire-associated core countries. The true associates of the empire, these are the true associates of the empire, are the rich countries, like Britain, France, Germany, etc. They are and they can be associated because labor is equally expensive in all countries. Countries not engaging in unfair competition with each other, as the peripheral countries do, because they unfair because they have lower wages. They also maintain a current account surpluses and keep their balance of payments in equilibrium. They have given the inflows of interest, dividends, and royalties. So they have a surplus, and this surplus is due to the interest, dividends, and royalties they receive from the periphery. The balance of payments not naturally is in equilibrium. The United States is curiously an exception in this case, because the United States has huge economic deficits, current account deficits, besides public deficits. Independent countries, a short story, history. From 1950s to 1970s, the countries that had some freedom to industrialize due to the Cold War, this is interesting. The United States was totally devoted to the Cold War, and so they realized in relation to Latin America, I don't know, probably also in relation to Asia, but I don't know, that dictatorships were a good solution. Friendly dictatorships. So they left, and they left these dictatorships to industrialize. They were not concerned about this. It was okay for them. That was the period would have an enormous development and became an industrialized almost industrialized, a quasi-industrialized country by 1980. The Latin American, once the Vietnam War ended and the crisis of the 70s unfolded, the empire reorganized itself. The Latin American countries that had accumulated debt in the 70s experienced a major external debt and crisis and submitted themselves to the empire by liberalizing their economies around 1990. The liberalization in the United States, what I call the neoliberal turn, had happened 10 years before, in 1980. Since the 80s, the countries that remained independent were those in East, Southeast, and South Asia, which did not face the external debt crisis of the 80s and benefited from nationalist elites. There is a difference between the Latin American elites and the Asian elites. The Latin American elites believe they are European, while the Asian countries, this is absurd. It makes no sense for them, I believe. Sayat is here, she may correct me. Dependent countries, our case, depend to the empire, the economic elites, including the upper middle class, are associated, subordinated to the empire. They are much closer to the ideas of the empire than with the interests of their own people. These countries like this, are not nations. They are semi-colonies. They are semi-colonies. I'm hearing about the middle-income trap. Nobody was able to tell me why countries fall in the middle-income trap. Makes no sense. Well, but the World Bank introduced this concept. The concept became popular, and everybody is always speaking in the newspapers, including we have the middle-income trap. Well, Eliane Araujo is there, and myself and Lopez, Samuel Lopez, we wrote a paper saying that really a lot of countries, a lot of middle-income countries stopped growing or started growing very slowly from 2000, more or less, around 2000. Why? Well, for a very simple reason. Because all these countries, had in 1990 opened their, around 1990, opened their economies, made the marvelous reforms that the empire wanted. Trade liberalization, financial liberalization, privatization. The result could not be another than semi-stagnation. So we decided to call this trap the liberalization trap. See, Bresser-Pereira, Araujo, Lopes. The only. The empire searches to block industrialization in the periphery. Why? because it wants to maintain the unequal exchange system. The unequal exchange system is the old classical system where countries, rich countries, exchange manufactured goods, sophisticated goods that pay high wages, for commodities that are not sophisticated, have a high income per capita, and pay low wages. So that's they want to maintain this. Second, they don't want competition. Some disagreeable countries, like in India, for instance, unsubordinated countries like India and China and Korea, South Korea, etc., they decide to ignore the pressures from the north and had continued to grow. Latin America, since 1990, is quasi-stagnant. Actually, since 1980, because in 1980 we had the huge debt crisis. But after the great debt crisis came this liberalization trap. And finally, it wants to free inflow and outflow of their capitals, for their capitals. One of the central characteristics of the empires in the plural, is that they want to support capitals. They have excess capitals, they must support capitals. The only thing that is interesting is that for the first time, I believe, with the new developmentalist theory, this export of capitals does not add to the development of developing countries. Instead of that, they replace the domestic savings by the foreign savings. There is papers, a lot of things about this. The empire's instruments for influencing the peripheral countries. First, their hegemonic soft power, or in other words, their ideological hegemony. Soft power and the ideological hegemony is the same thing. Now it's not clear. But for what they use this soft power, or their ideological hegemony? To sell to developing countries the economic liberalism. I put there to justify liberalization measures, I don't know why. Well, economic liberalism, that is, reforms according to the vocabulary of the empire. Suddenly, in the 90s, all problems of the world would be solved by reforms. And reforms, or liberalization, privatization, and the financial liberalization. Well, so the first instrument, first tool, is soft power. The second are economic sanctions of varying intensity. Brazil never had sanctions. Unless, just now with Mr. Trump, that you had a kind of sanction, but it is, and And third, there is the constant threat of the empire. By designating a country an autocracy, a label broader than the old axis of evil. Autocracy, or if you are called an autocracy now, if you are bad, you are unacceptable, you are the enemy. What the empire imposes on peripheral countries? Political submission under the threat of labeling the country autocratic, financial liberalization, trade liberalization, and liberal democracy. Well, liberal democracy, yes, democracy. But this is also what we want. So in this case, democracy is a universal value. So they want, so you are brothers. Not so much. Yes. It is politically the only valid option. But the empire, for the empire, democracy is also a way of easier and safer to dominate the peripheral country. The autocratic ruler is always an incognita. Incognita in English is the same thing in Portuguese. That's a surprise. He may either conform with colonial rule or oppose to it. It's a kind of, it's relatively a choice that he has. Instead, the empire expects that in the framework of democracy, the local imperial dependent elites will manage to run the country by combining their and the empire's soft power. Because the local elites also have soft power, and the pressure over the whole country for economic liberalism is very strong, no? Permanent. So this is the democracy in this sense. The social classes in the game. The empire-dependent elite. This social class has existed in every empire. Remember, since the antiquity, remember Israel in the time of Christ. And there was a Jewish elite that was associated to the Roman Empire. This was the empire always find at least part of the elite, not to associate with. The dependent elite is mostly formed of commodity exporters and big business. It's content with retaining part of the economic surplus, while the other part goes to the empire. The upper middle class is also part of such a coalition. This is a political coalition. In addition to not having alternative, the dependent elite feels safer, protected by the empire. Agribusiness and export-import commercial firms, all of them want free trade. Therefore, they are anti-developmentalists and anti-nationalists. Agribusiness fears the neutralization of the Dutch disease, which it intuitively see as contrary to their interests. it is anti-environmentalist, for sure. The independent elite. The independent elite is developmentalist, supports moderate state intervention, adopts national government perspectives, advocates productive sophistication. Its nationalism is anti-imperialist. This is important because for 10 years, I make this, mea culpa, I taught a class, it was just a class, not a course, a class on nationalism. And I used a literature that only spoke of nationalism in the rich countries, because this is the literature about. So, in this literature, there was not imperialism, absolutely absent, and for sure, anti-imperialism. That is what, in the periphery, when you have an empire and you are in periphery, you have to, your nationalism must be anti-imperialist. You can see that new developmentalism is anti-imperialist. But not only classical developmentalism, and look, remember that classical developmentalism and new development are very similar. One is just the complement of the other with some differences. Classical developmentalism was already anti-imperialist. This is especially clear in the works of Raul Prebisch, probably the more important classical developmentalist of all. And Mr. Prebisch had the scheme of center-periphery. Center was the empire. Periphery was the periphery, was developing countries. He could not speak about central imperialism and colonies, semi-colonies, because he was in the United Nations, in CEPAL. But, and all the theory, all the theoretical defense of industrialization was anti-imperialist, because the empire didn't want you to industrialize. And this Mr. Prebisch and his colleagues wanted. Well, come back to, it does not, the independent elites, the knowledge elite is a very important part of this. It does not confront with the American empire. It knows that the negotiation is necessary. It existed in Brazil at certain moments, specifically between 1947 and 64, and between 1967 and 1980, or 90 if you want, but today is practically non-existent. Sad thing. Dependent upper middle class. The upper middle class has a standard of living similar to the rich countries. It obtains part of the economic surplus. The managerial class obtains it via salaries and bonuses. The middle bourgeoisie via profits. Not by design, but as a fact. This is one of the causes, not main is perhaps excessive, but this is one of the causes of the severe inequality that exists in Brazil. I will later speak about another cause. What is left for the rest is very little, because not only the rich receive a large chunk, and the upper middle class another. The alienated lower middle classes, alienated from the national interests. It is subordinate to empire-dependent elite. It is the largest portion of the middle class. The entire lower petit bourgeoisie, the large share of the managerial middle class. It has been a source of voters addicted to extreme right national populism. People that resent the economic success of the upper middle class. Knowledge middle class, inspired in Bourdieu. It composed mainly of intellectuals and artists. They are progressive, advocate reducing inequality through state action. They are developmentalists, support moderate state intervention in the economy, and not all are economic nationalists. They are involved in fighting global warming and defending nature. The working class opposed the capitalist class by fighting not for socialism, but for higher wages, better working conditions, and the welfare state as a whole. Include workers from both public and private sectors. They are nationalists. Yes, they are nationalists, as they cannot move to abroad. The upper middle class always can. The rich, for sure. They cannot ally themselves with the empire, which is not interested in them. And but includes segments subordinated to the extreme right populism, the right-wing poor. That I hope the Hallé, the marginalized underclass, this broad class race group, because most of them are browns or Negroes, are situated below the working class, as defined by José Souza. José Souza wrote a book about the Hallé. A marginalized and humiliated population living in favelas and poor rural areas, representing roughly 1/3 of the Brazilians. Hallé's political presence is limited to the presidential elections. Since Brazil became a democracy, it has voted for Lula, despite evangelical preaching. But it also includes the right-wing poor, associated to extreme right populism. Social classes are in the game to capture the economic surplus. As the economic surplus is what exceeds the necessary consumption, to remember. The inter-capitalist class captures the surplus through interest, dividends, and real estate rents. The financial managerial class through managing rentier wealth and winning salaries and bonuses. The administrative managerial class to salaries and bonus also. The managerial middle class through salaries, not bonus. The middle class and the middle and petit bourgeoisie through profits. The skilled working class through high wages. The empire he captures the economic surplus of the developing country through dividends, interests, and royalties. This year, the sum of dividends, interests, and royalties is about 4% of GDP. 4% of GDP. Huge. Examples of economic policies adopted by the empire. I'm coming. Trade liberalization. It was adopted in 1999, drastically reduced import tariffs. In the case of Brazil, from 45 to 12%, eliminated export subsidies for manufactured goods, abandoned two development policies, infant industry protection, Dutch disease neutralization. All this triggered a major wave of deindustrialization, beginning in 1990. Financial liberalization. It was adopted in Brazil in 1992 and intensified in 1990. The other Latin Americans were more or less the same. By liberalizing capital flows, Brazil lost control it had previously over the exchange rate. This policy facilitated the rise of the interest rates, which became the main instrument to attract foreign capital. Higher interest rates financed the flowered growth with foreign savings policy, because Brazil adopts the foreign savings policy. He expects to grow with foreign savings. This foreign savings policy, instead of increasing investment, it increased the consumption. So was popular. They are in opposition to increase taxes and defend subsidies. Subsidies to the rich. They are against taxing the economic elites, for sure, and the luxury consumption that was classically taxed in the period of high growth. They oppose and they want to maintain subsidies to the rich, the agribusiness, and to the rentiers. This, together with accumulated capital and managerial knowledge, are the main causes of high inequality. Oh, diabo, agora apagou. Conclusions. I think. O que é?
Você passou slide a mais.
Eu passei slide. Ah, industrial policy. Brazil's current industrial policy, specifically Brazil, since 2022, provides limited incentives for investment by national firms. Instead, it disproportionately benefits multinationals in the automotive sector, which receive substantial subsidies. Considering the 100 greater receivers, the multinational accounted for 72% of all incentives. Pardon. This I owe to Mateus Tarentin. Where is Mateus? There, like in the back. He's a bad student, so he's hiding there. Conclusions. Using the geosociology approach, we examined the interplay between the empire and the periphery intermediated by the social class. From what we discussed, From that, we discussed the main obstacles Latin America faces to overcome quasi-stagnation. The alliance between the empire and the empire-dependent economic elites. The absence of industrial entrepreneurs willing to ally with workers and public bureaucracy to form a developmental coalition. The industrial entrepreneurs have not a thinking anymore in Brazil, and they are very small. The industrialization was so big that most of the entrepreneurs are dead, and now we have the heritages, and the heritages are rentiers. The loss of control over the exchange rate and the interest rate. The extreme inequality resulted in a priority given to distribution over economic development. And on the other hand, since this last thing, what I mean by this is that the governments, especially take for instance the case of Lula, he has given much more priority to distribution than to economic development. And this is general. Since Brazil became a democracy, reducing inequality has attracted more support than a developmentalist strategy, to generalize. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have time for a few questions.
Yes. Thank you. Hello, hello. Is it working? Okay. Thank you so much, Professor. It was a great speech. Now we're going to open for some questions. So just raise your hands, and I can bring the microphone. Does someone say the name and then? Yeah. Okay.
First,
Stand up.
my name is Misael Dutra. I'm from Federal University of ABC, UFMG. First of all, I'd like to thank Professor Bresser-Pereira for the presentation. It was very insightful. I wrote down my question. I'll read it. Professor Bresser, building on your critique of liberal democracy and its geopolitical instrumentalization, how can countries in the global south design democratic frameworks that both resist US-centered normative pressures and confront the rise of radical right-wing movements that often deepen dependence and undermine national developmental strategies? Posso. Sorry. Em cima da sua crítica sobre a democracia liberal e sua instrumentalização geopolítica, como os países do sul global podem montar frameworks, estratégias democráticas que podem resistir tanto às pressões normativas dos Estados Unidos, quanto confrontar o crescimento da direita radical. E, em sua visão, quais formas de inovações democráticas institucionais poderiam salvaguardar políticas que levem à preservação de estratégias de desenvolvimento autônomo na América Latina? Obrigado.
My young friend, I cannot respond to your question. It's too much. Look, democracy is not the only possible option, but it is the hope also, because as you became more democratic, you reduce the power of the economic elites. But this is a long process, and it seems that when you see United States, for instance, we see that growth does not help it in this matter. There are the economic elites, now the 6 or 7 tech businessmen have all power, have a lot of power. So when you look to Europe, things are better. There was progress, in my view. Democracy is much better. But they are subordinated to the United States, and they are trapped by this subordination. So now they are spending in weapons, armament. There are armaments because they must defend Russia from the Russia that is menacing to invade France, in Germany, and for sure also England, very shortly. This is such a ridiculous thing, no? But this is what they think. So even Europe didn't. So we cannot be optimistic about this.
Any other question or comment?
Is it my turn? Yeah. Professor, thank you very much for your class. My name is Antonino. I come from Uruguay, but I studied in Brazil, in Foz do Iguaçu, in the Universidade Federal da Integração Latino-Americana.
Good.
And I have been reading your work since undergrad, so I am very honored to be here. So very quickly, and I'm going to try to be clear because it's kind of a complex question. I'm thinking that in Latin America, because of our colonial history, we have particularly problematic aspect that people in Asian countries, for example, don't have, which is the racial cleavage that you were talking about just before. Yeah. Middle classes and elites that see themselves as white Europeans in a and I think that's a huge problem which makes our task much more difficult, perhaps, than in other regions. So I wanted to ask you, what views do you have on winning over those sectors of progressive middle classes here in Latin America who identify themselves with progressive middle classes of the core countries in Europe or in the United States, so they see the importance of redistribution very clearly because they are progressive, but when you speak to them about nationalism and conflicts of interests between our countries and the core countries that they admire because of cultural products and friends and such, they tend to not see it as important, or they associate nationalism with a kind of a reactionary position. So what do we do with that? Because I came to university, I read your work, so I am convinced. But I see most of my my colleagues and friends, you get what I mean? So they, thank you very much.
I said that the progressive were nationalists, but not all. There was a small, maybe, perhaps most are not. Well, how can we explain this? I believe that they if you consider, for instance, two problems. One is anti-imperialism, and the other is anti-capitalism, not capitalism, the upper classes. These elites are much more, they are anti the upper class, then they are anti-empire. An explanation for this, a possible explanation for this, but this is that the empire gives much more importance to and use much more of its soft power to demoralize nationalism than to demoralize the fight for equality. This is an exogenous explanation, the empire. Maybe you should also discover endogenous explanation, but I am not now able to find one.
Good morning, Professor. My name is Edgar Pereira, and thank you for your presentation, for being here with us. And I will pose my question to you in Portuguese, just to be clear on when I want to know your about what you want and want to know your opinion. Na época do governo Juscelino.
You have to speak in English.
Yeah.
Yes,
okay.
you have to speak in English. If I don't understand, I may ask you to.
Okay.
But if you raise is better.
Okay. Stand up. Okay.
Stand up.
Okay. Well, my question is, what do you think about this a possible coalition between national and international interests as we have
between the national
international interests, especially in the industry and in areas of new technology, as we have in the time of the JK government, Juscelino Kubitschek period, and the plano de metas, when we have a group of the managerial groups coordinating in a national and international of industrial interest that time. And what I want to know if you think that now in this international environment, with the rise of the China as a global leader in the industrial activities, in the industry in general, if you think that's now it's possible a kind of building a coalition between national interest, Brazilian interest, industrial Brazilian interest, and industrial interest, international industrial interest, under kind of coordination, under the coordination of some Brazilian agency. Okay.
Okay. Look, Pereira, I don't believe this is possible. And look about what happened in Juscelino Kubitschek government. I am a fan of Juscelino Kubitschek. He was a nice person. He made a big mistake that's there, Brasilia. Anyway, but if you look more, and this period, this moment of the the economic policy that created the automotive industry is very celebrated in Brazil, and you are celebrating. And I suggest you to rethink about that. Because look what was the outcome. The outcome was that the whole automotive industry in Brazil is foreign. All countries of similar dimension and level of growth, not countries, they soon began to develop the automotive industries, national automotive industries. Some more successfully, like South Korea, China, other less, like India, but they have their own cars also. So this is not this kind of agreement goes to nowhere, in my view.
Last question. Bresser, for those who not know me, I'm José Luiz Oreiro, Associate Professor at the University of Brasilia. Bresser, I have just two brief remarks about your presentation. The first one is you mentioned two waves of financial liberalization in Brazil. The last one that you mentioned is in the end of the 90s. But recently, we had another wave of financial liberalization on the Bolsonaro government with Roberto Campos Neto as the chairman of the Central Bank of Brazil, in which the rest of the capital and exchange rate controls that existed in the legislation was simply abolished. So the process of financial liberalization in Brazil, I think that ended at the Bolsonaro government.
Okay.
That was the first remark.
Wonderful.
The second remark is about Lula and Lula's government, or PT government, there's the fifth of six government, and its relationship with developmentalism. In Brazil, as you know, developmentalism is associated with Getúlio Vargas and his political heirs. The last one was Leonel Brizola.
Yes. And
for me, I think that the transition point from developmental state to a welfare state or social state was precisely in 1989 elections, because we had at that time Collor, which represented the neoliberalism in Brazil, and two alternative projects on the left wing of the Brazilian policy, which one was Lula and the other one Leonel Brizola. And for, I think, 50,000 votes, Leonel Brizola did not go to the second turn of the election. And since then, Lula and the idea of what is really necessary for Brazil is to make redistribution of income, not economic development, became the hegemonic view on the left-wing side of our politics. That's my two comments. Many thanks.
thank you, Zé Luiz. I agree fully with your 2 points. I have nothing to add. Thank you.
A last question.
Tem lá uma moça
My
bonita.
friend Leila.
Good morning, Professor. Thank you very much. I'm Leila from Argentina. I really appreciated the detailed presentation of social classes you did, which is, as you know, not common in an economics class. And it's absolutely important to understand our societies and our economies. My question is on the point you brought on the decline of entrepreneurial industrial classes or sectors, and if you see any strategy we could implement in this regard so as to give a rebirth to these classes, this sector of industrial sectors in our countries. In particular, if you see any fractions of current, for example, the new tech sectors, which I know is difficult, but if you see where we could start to rebuild that actor that it's so critical for developmental policies. Thank you very much.
Well, Leila, I am looking for this class for years and years, and trying and hoping, but what I see is sometimes what I hope, because it's just hope, is that okay, we will have less industrialists and more managers, public managers, and the public managers may have a national perspective. But I'm not convinced about this hope. No? So you see, I'm very good in making my critics, in finding solutions. I am not. Thank you. Okay.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll have a half an hour coffee break, and then we come back. Well, the coffee break is going to be here, so, and then we come back at 11 for the first round table.
Fazer a impressão em capa dura. Saiu por R$65. Você já tem muito dinheiro, não precisava pagar royalties para você? Hoje é dia 12. Nós vamos botar luz para padroeira da
eu só vou conseguir ficar de manhã. Hoje e amanhã eu só consigo ficar de manhã, porque de tarde eu tenho compromisso já.
Então, estágio assim, um argumento.
Ela está estudando economia. É vida de universidade. Ela adora a vida de
Não, eu tenho. Tá de boa.
Fabrício, você está ao teu lado. E o André, como é que você está? O André Nassif, Minicourse, Eliane Orelha.
É você que é o coordenador?
André, Eliane, o André que é seu primeiro, ele veio de lá, deixa ele. A Eliane não veio.
Ô, Tiago, eu vou falar em pé, tá?
Mas aí a gente senta, né? Quiser pode ficar aqui se quiser.
Tem que ir de lá.
Good morning, everyone. Let's start the next activity. Please take your seat. Let's start, please. Again, yes.
Anúncio antes. Let's start the next session, please. Sit. I just wanted to advance that we booked for the lunch the Wall Street Hotel. It's right next to FGV, so everybody is invited. Unfortunately, we cannot pay for everyone, but we booked it, and would be nice to have everyone there with us. So after this session, we will go there together. Okay.
Thank you, Tiago. Again, good morning. Thank you for all. My name is Fabrício. I'm professor federal at UFMG, Universidade Federal de Minas Gerais. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Today I am simply serving as a chair of this road table. Be honest, my empirical model doesn't work, so I don't have good results to show. Sorry about this. Next year I try hard. Yeah, I'm so sorry. Luckily for all, it will be here great research. Yeah, so this session is about fiscal policy and investment in developing country. My role is coordinate the discussion, which present will have up to 30 minutes for their presentation. 25, yeah. Thank you. We are joined today by André Nassif, Eliane Araujo, José Luiz Oreiro, in this order of presentation. So without further delay, let's begin with André. Floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning. Alô? 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 Well, good morning. Thank you for the invitation. I love this workshop because it's one of the best workshops in Brazil because it's not only restricted to theory, but also proposals. And my presentation, it's a short presentation to discuss the development stagnation in Brazil. It's a short proposal to resume and sustain economic growth. Of course, it's more or less pretentious because we economists are unable to change the mind of people, to change structural change in the nations because it depends on political, economic, cultural, historic, in Brazil political mainly, but I'll do my best. To talk about development stagnation in Brazil, it's necessary to remark two long-term phases. The first one, the phase of development between 1930 and 1980, in which Brazil grew, GDP grew by about 7.5%, almost the double of the world economy, and labor productivity grew at Chinese rates, 4.5% a year. In contrast, the stagnation, which began in the beginning of the 80s with the external debt crisis and high inflation, so on. But it still is ongoing. the GDP grew in Brazil at very low rates, 2.2%, less than the world economy, and the labor productivity growth running around 0% a year. So rather than a semi-stagnation path, it's a quite stagnation path. So we could remark it in these two periods, basically summarizing, while in the first phase of development, the emphasis was on growth, and indeed there was complacence toward high inflation, external indebtedness, since Juscelino Kubitschek in the 50s. But we could say that the Brazilian economy was characterized by macroeconomic static inefficiency, but high macroeconomic efficiency due to high economic growth and labor productivity path. In contrast, in the post-1980 period, it was a phase of premature deleterious phenomena, such as premature industrialization in the absence of structural change aimed at sector that generate and diffuse technological progress. The main achievement was stabilization, inflation stabilization. So we could say that there was less focus on growth objectives and structural transformation. So summarized, we could say that we improve macroeconomic efficiency, but at the cost of high macroeconomic inefficiency. So some empirical evidence on stagnation is an issue because overcoming it and resuming growth toward the catching up depends on micro, meso, macroeconomic factors. Macroeconomic and meso challenges are enormous in Brazil, I agree, that they involve national development policies, industrial policy, foreign aid policy, credit, education, training, and so on. But, however, such requirements, it's my judge, are necessary but not sufficient condition for resuming sustained economic growth. My hypothesis, we test econometrically, is that the persistence of stagnation is conditioned basically by macroeconomic factors. And in this paper, by me and my co-author, Carmem, Feijo, Eliane Araujo, Lucilene Morandi, published in Structural Change Economic Dynamics, we ran a model based following Macmillan and Roderick to investigate the main factors explaining the stagnation understood in our case as the lack of structural change towards sectors in technological of high technological intensive. And so among several macroeconomic and macroeconomic factors, one of the two explaining variable was due to real exchange rate of valuation during booms, basically, and extremely high real interest rates. Why these trends in Brazil? Because Brazil has a long-term history of engaged in a strategy of development based on foreign savings. Is that after the 2000, for example, in a world, in an economy with high external financial openness and a very rigid inflation target, what happens is that during the bonanza period in which the world economy is characterized as high liquidity, there are large net capital inflows and the currency tend to overvalue. In contrast, during domestic and external shocks, the currency tends to undervalued, if not showed overshooting. This is illustrated here in this figure, in which the green bars are the real exchange rate, and the line, the real interest rates. Beginning with the bars, we note that in Brazil, not only the nominal exchange rate, but also the real exchange rate are not only volatile, characterized by high volatility, but alternated periods of sharp overvaluation during the expansive cycle of the economy and sharp undervaluation during economic crisis, such as the current period. Of course, there is several consequences, such as the drop of the gross investment rates. Brazil shows mediocre 17% of GDP in total gross. It's incredible. It's impossible to think about several deep transformation we need in the environment and digital economy with such a very low investment rate. And also characterized as a consequence of the drop of capital stock. And due to fiscal austerity characterized in the last decades, also the share of public investment in total is also very, very low. For example, only to talk about the general government, on average in the last decade, running around 2% if we discount the depreciation rates in the last decade. The public investment of federal government was at negative rates. And another consequence is a sharp premature deindustrialization, characterized by the drop of the share of manufacturing total GDP, and a premature large increase of the share of service sectors of low productivity, as the case in Brazil. And also in the area of structural productive, in the manufacturing sector, Brazil shows a very weak structural change towards scale-intensive and science knowledge-based manufacturing. We generally well-succeeded historical experience of development and catching up. We observe a sharp drop of labor-intensive manufacturing, but that is offset by a large increase of scale specialized suppliers, that is basically capital goods and science-based. In Brazil, we observe a very increase of resource-based manufacturing, a sharp decrease of labor-intensive sector, but without accompanied by an increase of high-intensive, medium and high-intensive manufacturing subsectors. And also, this reflects on the trade partner, international partner, in which on export sides, Brazil reproduce a case of reprimarization of the basket, with primary goods increasing their share from 14% to 5%, and a high dependence, 90% of total imports in Brazil are manufacturing goods. There was a regressive specialization of Brazilian trade partner. So, my last talk is about a proposal to resume a sustained economic growth in Brazil. Of course, my hypothesis is this is basically due to a macroeconomic factor. But of course, it is needed to combine what I called for industrial, systemic industrial policy, because a systemic industrial policy at the new Schumpeterian framework is understood of a combination of the structural, industrial policy structure sense with coordination of all other public policies, such as education, infrastructure, training, science, and basic, and also the macroeconomic regime. So we could, I generally use in such framework industrial policy as synonymous of national development plans. So it's need a national development plan, designing, planning, implementing, evaluating forward-looking orientation, based on this following goals: employment and reduction of social and regional imbalances, innovation, technological development, and also replacing high for low CO2 emission technology. Brazil is in front of a great opportunity to take advantage of invest in this new disruptive technology. Industrial manufacturing of critical minerals, but characterized not only by extraction to reproduce such a green neocolonialism, but basically transformation, industrial and technological transformation. Infrastructure and upgrade based on potential comparative advantage, to change comparative advantage. But this is not a sufficient condition. The sufficient condition is really to change radically the new macroeconomic regime in Brazil. First, the monetary policy, the inflation target regime in Brazil, compared with several other developing countries that use such a monetary framework. In Brazil, it is one of the most conservative and rigid monetary policy. You should say, basically, to deal with or to introduce a longer horizon to reach the target, such as India and other Asian countries that establish the medium term and not a calendar year to do that. And wider bands to change the inflation target from 3% to 4%. We lost this opportunity 2 years ago, and to establish a double mandate for the central bank. It makes a great difference. That is, the goals must be not only to reach the target, but also to boost growth, such other countries. And at exchange rate policy, Brazil, in practice, is one of the few countries in the world that practice an almost pure floating exchange rate regime. Almost pure, the manager of the floating exchange rate regime in Brazil. This should be replaced by an exchange rate regime in which INESA is called flexible, manageable flexible exchange rate regime, in which the central bank practice more frequent intervention in the spot in case of Brazil, especially in future markets, with the goal of avoid overvaluation trend and volatility. What about the capital controls? Well, this is much more complicated. I'd like to debate with the audience, because from the logic point of view, I should favor capital controls, but for the execution, political execution viability, I recognize that's quite complicated. And finally, at fiscal policy, of course, Brazil should replace the current framework. It also is based on austerity for a truly counter-cycle fiscal policy in which, with basically the goal to increase definitively the share of public spending investment in the total total gross investment. I could ask, why not a fund, as Professor Bresser proposed and supported by Professor André Lara Rezende, use it for public investment? Why not? I asked to Nelson Barbosa last week, and he also agreed with, why not a minimum target for public investment? I think that Manuel Pires could help us about this proposal. I mean that there is several options to change the fiscal policy in order to increase the share of total public investment in total. But without illusion, the main obstacle to shift economic policy in Brazil, are of political ideological nature. I could reproduce this extraction from Celso Furtado, made short after the military coup, in which Celso Furtado said, this lack of greater influence on the industrial class in political leadership is, to a large extent, responsible for the slow modernization of Brazil's institutional framework. The political constitutions have served as a powerful instrument in the hands of traditionalist oligarchy. At that time, Celso Furtado was referring to traditional agrarian elite. Nowadays, I could say that our traditionalist, not so traditionalist, oligarchy nowadays is financial ranchers and agribusiness oligarchs. So, continuing, in the hands of traditional oligarchy to preserve their position as the dominant political force. So we have to fight against this high dominant political force represented by Arthur Lira, Hugo Mota, and so on. Thank you.
Thank you, André, for a great presentation. It's a perfect time. Congratulations. Now you have a presentation for Eliane. The floor is yours.
Good morning, everybody. First of all, I would like to thank for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. Today I will present some highlights on the paper Current Account Deficits and Economic Development in Emerging and Frontier Economies, a critical examination and new empirical evidence. This paper is in collaboration with Tiago, Porto, Nelson Marconi, and Professor Bresser. And our goal is to understand if deficit in current account can contribute to economic growth or it can be a problem for that. And different from Fabrício, we have a model, and I would like to thank Tiago that worked a lot with me to have these results. Thanks, Tiago. Okay, so what is the motivation of our paper? First, it is inserted in the globalization, financial and trade globalization that had increased the integration among countries. And we have the orthodox promise that says that capital should flow from rich to poor economies, allowing developing countries to run current account deficit, increase investment, and accelerate economic development. But we also have historical evidence that shows that large and persistent deficit often do not lead to sustained growth, but instead increase economic fragility, external debt, and repeated balance of payment crisis. So is inserted in this idea that we try to investigate empirically if current account can contribute or be a problem for economic growth. Only to formalize the theoretical debate, we have the orthodox view that says foreign savings complement domestic savings. So the idea is foreign savings inflow supplement domestic savings, which in turn will increase total investment and accelerate economic growth. So in this context of mainstream theory, we have that foreign savings are a desirable tool for overcoming domestic resource constraint, and it can contribute to economic growth as it can supplement domestic saving. But we also have the new developmentalism critic that argue that instead of complementing domestic saving, external saving can cause a counterproductive cycle that undermines long-term economic growth. And the idea is that instead of complement domestic saving, current account deficit can external saving can substitute domestic saving and not complement this saving. And the idea of the new developmentalism model is that foreign savings influx can cause currency appreciation, also high interest rate, and it can substitute domestic saving and cause the industrialization, slower economic growth, and so on. And to investigate if what theory is correct or what is the result, we have an empirical methodology, and we employ two complementary empirical strategies using a panel of 63 emerging and frontier economies. Frontier economies are smaller, less developed, but they still have room to grow, so we decided to include this country in our database. And we have two parts of empirical methodology. The first one is correlation, and in this case, we have, first, we have a kind of threshold to identify if the country has a persistent and also a large current account deficits. We have many thresholds in the paper, but I will show you the results for countries that registered at least 3% of current account deficit during at least 7 years. And this is what we call control group, episode groups. And we will also have a control groups that is the stable countries. So in this correlation part, we will only compare the difference between the countries that have episodes of deficits with countries that are stable, that were stable in this period and didn't have episodes of current account deficits in this threshold. And as we are economists, we know that correlation doesn't mean causality, and we have another part of the model that we will try to find the causality between current account deficit and economic growth. As for the results, and we have other results in this correlation part, but I will show only this part because there are so many results. But our first finding is that countries with persistent current account deficits, countries that have used external saving, systematically show structural weakness. And we compared the macroeconomic performance, GDP per capita, saving, investment, interest rate, FDI inflows, external debt, and a measure of undervaluation of real exchange rate during different decades. And we are comparing this table, the difference from countries that are episodes of debt and countries that are controlled, that are stable countries. So what we have, if we look at, I don't know if I can point from here. Yes, okay. So we are comparing the macroeconomic results from countries that had current account deficits and countries that are stable. And we have these indicators and the results during different decades, from 1980s, 1990 to 2000, 2010. And if we look at these results, we can see that the GDP from the countries that are episodes are small compared to the control groups. Also, gross domestic saving is also small. Investment, gross domestic investment is also small. Interest rate is high. We also have external debt that is high, and this measure of exchange rate we can see in the 2000 and 2010 that the exchange rate is overvaluated compared to the control group. So, as we can see, this first part that is only based in short-term correlations in the different decades, we can see that these countries showed structural weakness. But we have another part that is correlation, but it is in the long run. If you look at this figure, I am only showing the results from gross domestic saving and external debt. And we are comparing during the decade that the country showed the current account deficit, and what is happening in the decade before, after these results. So we have a kind of persistence effect. And we can see that this weakness is not only it is not only in the short run, but our results showed that these results is long-run results, so we have a kind of hangover effect, because in the case of gross domestic saving, the drop in the short run was 14%, but in the following decade, the result was 17%. In the case of external debt, we had during the episodes, for example, in the 2010, that I am showing here, during the episode, the result was an increase of 8% in the external debt, but in the decade after, we have 18% of increase. So based on this correlation part, we have weakness that is in the short run and also in the long run. And in the second part of our empirical strategy that we have causality, I am showing here the result of GMM system, but we estimate the different models, GMM system, fixed effect, moving average, and main different models to try to find if there is causality between current account deficit and economic growth in this group of 63 countries that we are studying from 1980 to 2024. And we can see, and we have different models, as you can see. I am showing 8 different models controlled for different variables. And our econometric model show that we have a direct causal relationship between current account deficit and GDP per capita, and it is controlled by main variables. And here I only extract the results from one of these models here, only to see the size of the coefficient, because it's very difficult to see in the table. But here we have the short-run coefficient, and remember that we are using in the model the balance, the current account balance, and not external saving. That is the opposite sign. So if the result here is positive, it means that current account balance are associated with economic growth. But as the result is symmetric, we can see that if we have, if we are using domestic saving, external saving, I'm sorry, it is associated with small economic growth. So this is the coefficient in the shorter run, and in the longer run, because in GMM we also can calculate the longer run effect, and we can see that the long run coefficient is higher than in the short run. So this third part of the model, we can see that we have a causal and a negative effects from using external saving and GDP per capita. And so only to try to analyze the results and see if the evidence supports the new developmentalism view or if the evidence supports mainstream theory, We can remember that orthodox promises that foreign saving boost investment and growth, but our data shows that deficit episodes are linked to lower investment, high external debt, also high interest rate, overvaluate exchange rate, and small economic growth. And if we look at the new developmentalism critique, we can say that in new developmentalism we have foreign saving substitute domestic saving, cause appreciation and undermine competitiveness. And our data show that we find systematically lower domestic saving, higher interest rate, and evidence of exchange rate overvaluation in recent decades. And this was the correlation part, but also in the causality part, we have the negative effect of current account deficits and economic growth controlled by main variables. And trying to conclude, I don't know my time, if it's okay? Okay. So, in the policy implication part of our paper, we emphasize the importance of move from external reliance to domestic strengths, and we summarize some economic policies that can that are important for that. So the first one is prioritize domestic saving, shift focus from attracting foreign saving to actively generating and mobilizing domestic saving for productive investment. Also, maintain a competitive exchange rate, actively manage the exchange rate to prevent the long-term overvaluation that erodes industrial competitiveness and leads to the industrialization. Also, strategically manage capital flows, implement policies to manage the volume and composition of capital flows, favoring stable, production-oriented FTI over volatile short-term debt, and foster productive diversification, use industrial and trade policy to build a diversification and stimulate the productive structure, and also stimulate economic growth instead of using a consumption-led growth model. And to conclude, how to escape the external saving trap, Professor Bresser talked about our paper on liberalism trap and how to, and now I will, we have some discussion on this trap, but external savings trap. And the idea is pursue a sustainable development strategy based on domestic foundation, not on a chronic reliance on external finance. And for emerging and frontiers economies, the way forward is to build strong domestic capabilities, like the policy I suggested in the slide before, and recover macroeconomic control to break the long-standing cycle of vulnerability and stagnation. So, this is, as I told you, this is a work in progress. We worked on data, but we are open to questions. So, comments and questions are welcome. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Eliane. As usual, great presentation. Now you have the last presentation, Professor José Luiz Oreiro. Take your floor.
Não funcionou o meu modelo. Você não torturou ele direito. Vai fazer agora.
Honestidade intelectual sempre.
Well, hello?
No.
Hello? Well, good morning to everyone. First of all, I would like to acknowledge the kindly invitation to participate on this workshop made by Professor Bresser-Pereira, Professor Nelson Marconi, and Tiago Couto to be here today and present some ideas about the session. But first of all, I have to make some propaganda of my new book, okay? On August 2025, I just wrote a book entitled Monetary Macroeconomics, Employment, Money, and Interest Rates. This is not simple a second edition of the general theory, but the textbook that I wrote this year, and published this year, is a textbook that presents the state of art of post-Keynesian monetary macroeconomics. It's for selling here, and my signature is for free. Okay, well, as you see, because of this book, my original formation is in post-Keynesian economics. I have my master at the Pontifical Catholic University in Rio de Janeiro, 1996, supervised by Eduardo Amadeu, that wrote a very good book on Keynes general theory, entitled Keynes General Theory, Keynes General Theory and Accumulation. And my PhD thesis was supervised by Fernando de Carvalho, my mentor and my master at the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro, and my, so to speak, conversion to structuralism, I owe it to Professor Bresser-Pereira, and we start conversations and work in 2004 when he invited me to go to his home, and we just start a friendship and a cooperation that have us to publish a book. We, Professor Bresser-Pereira, Nelson Marconi, and me, at Routledge 10 years ago exactly, entitled Developmental Macroeconomics, New Developmentalism as a Growth Strategy, and was the first systematization of the new developmentalist ideas. And I think that from that book on, I think that new developmentalism develops a lot, okay? Well, I do not have a paper to present. I will present a narrative based that in some numbers and correlations. And since the subtitle of this section is about developing countries, I built a narrative based in 3 representatives of developing countries. The first one is China, the second one is Brazil, and the third one is almost forgotten in discussions about developing countries is Poland, because Eastern Europe is a developing region in the world. So, the idea that I want to begin my presentation is that there occurs in developing region a great divergence between 2000 and 2024. So the aim of my presentation is to investigate the relationship between deficits, both fiscal and current account, investment, which is gross formation of capital, per capita GDP growth, and the evolution of the manufacturing share across 3 distinct regional models. Well, first of all, to illustrate, we have data from the World Bank that shows the GDP per capita in US current dollars from 2000 to 2024 of Poland, China, and Brazil. As we can see, in the beginning of the 21st century, there is little divergence between the 3 countries, but Poland is a rising star in the Eastern Europe. Now it is catching up with Spain in a very fast pace. I remember that, well, I'm Spanish too, so that's why we always use Spain as a study case. But I remember that when I I was with my cousins in Spain in the beginning of the 21st century. They refer to Poland as the last peasants of Europe. Okay? But the reality is now that Poland is becoming not only a middle-income country, but can become a high-income country in the next 10 to 15 years. And you can see the evolution of GDP per capita in current dollars. The Poland is really fantastic in terms of GDP growth. And Brazil, from 2012 on, we stagnated and reduced our GDP per capita. Okay, so we have, in terms of development models, two competing development models. The first one is the successful one, is the export-led growth model of Asia. In this model, we have a mechanism, competitive exchange rates and high domestic savings. The outcome is current account surpluses, and the focus is the profitability of the tradable sector, which means mainly manufacturing sector, leads to high investment funded internally. That is the idea that capital is homemade. The second model, with the foreign saving growth, with Latin America, please, is not our company, flight company. Latam is not Latam, the flying company. But what is the mechanism? In this model, we have high interest rates in order to attract foreign capital. The outcome is current account deficits, and the focus is to attempting to boost investment via external savings, often leads to currency appreciation and consumption booms instead of investment booms. Well, so we have some study cases. The first study case is Brazil. Brazil is a country that falls on the foreign saving trap. Brazil exemplifies the growth with foreign savings model. Reliance on commodity exports and high interest rates attracted speculative capital, leading to cyclical currency appreciation, which we call Dutch disease. The result was a stagnant investment between 17 and 18% of GDP, and reliance on external finance, failing to generate sustainable convergence with advanced economies. I remember that when I have my teenager, we listened this phrase: Brazil has to got the last train to Paris. In 2000, the phrase changed a little. Brazil has to catch the last train to Lisbon. Now, I don't know if we can arrive in Lisbon. Okay, another case study is China. China is the model of the state-led powerhouse. China represents the export-led model. By maintaining a competitive exchange rate and exercising fiscal discipline in operating expenditures, China generated massive structural current account surpluses. These surpluses finance domestic investment rates above 40%, creating a self-sustaining cycle of industrial expansion and infrastructure development. Premature deindustrialization. Well, premature deindustrialization is a structural regression, as Nelson Marconi says on his papers. Defined by Hodrecht and Palmer, actually defined first by Palmer in a paper published in 2005, and then Hodrecht published a paper in 2016 without quoting Gabriel Palmer. Yes, and really recognize that. I think that André Nassif wrote to Hodrecht, remembering that the concept was first developed by Gabriel Palmer. I remember that you sent to me and to other people. Okay, but defined by Hodrecht and Palmer, this phenomenon occurs when a developing nation's manufacturing share shrinks before it reached high income levels. I'm redefining the concept in order to define premature deindustrialization as the deindustrialization that occurs before the country reached the Lewis point. I think that is more precise, but is a refinement of the premature deindustrialization. In Latin America, currency appreciation renders manufacturing industry, uncompetitive, shifting labor to low productivity services. Conversely, in Asian NICs, sustained industrial employment growth. Well, what are the methodology and key variables that we use in my grand narrative? Countries and regions. In Latin America, I pick up Brazil, which is the growth with foreign savings. In East Asia, China, which is the model of export-led growth. And in Eastern Europe, Poland, which is a little middle of the road between the two models, in which we have integration and foreign investment. But foreign investment directed to the manufacturing industry is very different from the Brazil model. Variables analyzed, gross capital formation, GDP growth and per capita GDP growth, the deficits, primary, nominal, and current account, and the manufacturing share, both output and employment. Well, first let's compare the average investment rate of these three countries between 2000 and 2024. As we can clearly see, China is a monster in terms of investment. The average investment rate in China in this period is more than 40% of GDP. Poland is a middle of the road case. It has an average investment rate of 20 to 21% during these 24 years. And Brazil is clearly outperforming. We have an average rate of investment rate of less than 18% of our GDP. As Nassif has already shown in his presentation, with such low investment rate, the growth of stock of capital is very low. Well, and the current account balance. Well, in blue, we have the China average current account balance during this period, which is more or less 3.5% of GDP, of current account surplus. Brazil, Latin America, which is in red, had a current account deficit of 1.9% of GDP on the average. And in this yellow is the Poland case, is more or less 1% of GDP. So Poland is the middle of the road between these two cases. Nominal fiscal deficit, well, we have Brazil, which is had the largest nominal fiscal deficit. Remember that nominal fiscal deficit incorporate interest payments of a nominal fiscal deficit of 6.5% of GDP. Poland, again, the middle of the road, 4% of GDP, which is almost the limit of the Maastricht Treaty. And China had precisely the number of the Maastricht Treaty, a nominal fiscal deficit of 3% on average of its GDP. Well, regarding the structural evolution, to be more precise, the manufacturing share as of GDP, in the three cases, what do you have? Brazil is the case of premature deindustrialization. From 2000 to 2024, manufacturing share shows a sharp decline from 25% of GDP to 12% of GDP. China had a stable, but in a very high level of manufacturing share. It reduces from 43 to 38% of GDP, but is the highest industrial share in the world, which sustains its long-term growth. And Poland is a case of stability. During this period, Poland exhibit manufacturing share of more or less 29% of GDP. In terms of employment share, Brazil shows a modest decline in terms of employment share from 16 to 13%. I think that Nelson Marconi had explained it in a book chapter published in 2015, why the difference between manufacturing share and employment share in Brazil. In China, we have a stable but high employment share, 22%, and Poland, we have also a stability of the employment, industrial employment share with 18%. Well, now correlations between manufacturing share and GDP growth. When we look to China, there is a very high correlation of manufacturing share and GDP growth of 0.85%. This means the mechanism is, of course, the Calder's law. High manufacturing share drove high GDP growth. Industry served as the engine of productivity and growth. In Poland, Eastern Europe, we have a moderate correlation of 0.6%. So a stable manufacturing share supported steady convergence with Western Europe. And Brazil and Latin America, yes, we have a positive correlation, but in the wrong side. Because although the correlation is positive, we have a situation in which a lower manufacturing share matches lower growth rates. Well, now the idea of twin deficits, the correlations. In Brazil, the hypothesis of twin deficits is validated. The correlation between fiscal deficits and external deficits is positive in 0.71 for the average of 2000 to 2024. What is the mechanism? Higher fiscal deficits leads to higher interest rates to currency appreciation to current account deficits. So fiscal expansion links into exports and debt service to foreigners. In China, however, we do not have the twin deficit hypothesis confirmed. It's divergent. The correlation is just 0.15, which is very weak. A fiscal expansion in China is observed by massive domestic savings. Even with fiscal deficits, the current account remains in surplus. So the key difference is that in China, the domestic saving rate is higher than investment rate. Well, and as I already told here, the idea that capital is homemade is based on Feldstein-Horioka puzzle. In Brazil, or in China, we have a high correlation between domestic savings and investment. China's high investment rate, which is 42% of GDP on average, is matched by an even higher domestic saving rate of 45%. Conclusion, sustainable growth is founded internally, validating the Feldstein-Horioka puzzle. In Brazil, however, the correlation is very low. Evidence, low domestic saving, forced reliance on foreign capital to close the gap, creating external vulnerability. Conclusion, the lack of homemade capital creates a ceiling for investment in Brazil. And about the main thesis, one of the main theses of neodevelopmentalism, the saving substitution hypothesis. Well, the saving substitution hypothesis is completely confirmed in the case of Brazil, in which the correlation is negative and very near 1, which means that when you increase in 1% of external saving, you reduce the domestic saving in 0.82%. Okay? Is the Bresser-Pereira hypothesis. Increase in foreign savings due to current account deficit leads to a decrease in domestic savings. Mechanism of failure, currency appreciation, inflows of capital appreciate the currency, a consumption boom due to artificially appreciated exchange rate. This artificially high purchasing power of workers boosts boosting imports and displacement. Foreign savings finance consumption, not investment. Well, here we have just some data on the evolution of real effective exchange rate trends in these three countries in the period. And the correlations. I evaluated the correlations between real effective exchange rate and manufacturing share. In Brazil, it's positive, which means that a depreciation in real effective exchange rate will higher manufacturing share, confirms that the competitive exchange rate is mandatory for industrial profitability. And the correlation between real effective exchange rate and foreign savings is negative. The idea is that the depreciation of exchange rate lower current account deficit and the competitive rate limits consumption imports. The correlation between real effective exchange rate and investment rate in Brazil is positive, although moderate. And the channel is the profit investment channel that Bresser always emphasizes. Mechanism, competitive, which means depreciated exchange rate, ensures profitability in the tradable sector, generating internal funds for investment. The result is higher tradable profits, fund higher investment. Brazil's failure, chronic appreciation of exchange rates, squeezed profits, leading to investment stagnation. Correlation between capital formation and GDP per capita growth. In China, we have a very high correlation, positive, of 0.71%, which means that investment efficiency translates into growth. In Poland, we have a moderate, although positive correlation, which means that we have an efficient capital utilization supported by FDI flows. And in Brazil, we have a positive but very low correlation between investment and GDP per capita growth, which means that we have low capital efficiency and investment is easily crowded out. Well, now we can analyze which is the superior model. The superior model is clearly the China model, based on exports and investment. In China, the fiscal deficit is controlled and used for productive investment. The current account exhibits a structural surplus. The exchange rate is competitive. The result is high investment, growth correlation, and no premature deindustrialization. Latin America, Brazil is the headline. The fiscal deficit is high and volatile, basically used to financing interest, including to me, I'm a hint here, and current account is in consistent deficit, foreign savings, exchange rate is appreciated. The result, low investment, growth correlation, and premature deindustrialization. So I think that this phrase is a good resume of my presentation. The growth with foreign saving model failed to generate sustainable growth. Investment stagnation and industrial regression are the main legacies of Brazilian macroeconomic policy in the period. So, what you can do is my policy recommendations. It's based on many papers that I wrote during my academic life. But I have policy propositions for monetary policy and fiscal and exchange rate policy. For monetary policy, I think that under Nassif also told in his presentation, the dual mandate, the central bank should target both inflation and employment or growth. We must have a structural reduction in interest rate. Lower interest rates are essential. Higher rates as we have now, and we had during the last 30 years, are ineffective to indexation and cause financial deficits. It's important to stress this. The main reason for fiscal imbalance in Brazil today is the high interest rates. More than 95% of our fiscal deficit is due to high interest rates. Okay? And we have to finish real plan and made a complete disindexation of the economy, which means reduce the general price indexation mechanism. Regarding fiscal and exchange rate policy, we must adopt, and I told this to the finance minister, Fernando in the period before, in the transition to the new government, that the fiscal policy in Brazil should be conducted by a structural target. Adopt a structural primary surplus target, which means an anti-cyclical fiscal policy to allow investment during downturns. A competitive exchange rate, which means active management and, my dear friend Andrea Nassif, capital controls are necessary. Capital controls is a thing that if you do, you have to say until the last moment that you will never do it, okay? You do it by surprise, okay? So if you're told that you do capital controls, well. So active management to prevent depreciation and Dutch disease. And of course, I cannot forgive to speak about that, green investment. Shift public spending from financial costs to green new developmentalism. Well, this is my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Oreiro, for a great presentation. What are you? Yeah. So you have time for collect some questions. And yes, please say your name. Take this.
Antonio Carlos Aidar from this house. I have some comments, in fact, not really a question. When Oreiro said that the real cause of fiscal imbalance is high interest rates, I would add easily a good tax reform. Because if you don't tax the agro, if you don't tax inheritance, if you don't, you are going to tax excise taxes. And be prepared, because in January excise tax is going to grow because of the fiscal reform that's going to begin. Therefore, if you don't tax the agro, if you don't tax inheritance, the causes of fiscal imbalance, and I discussed with Bresser a lot that when you talk about new developmentalism, you don't talk about tax reform. It's strange, because for me, it's impossible to solve the fiscal imbalance without doing that. And one interesting question, with this interest rate, no investment. It doesn't help to have fiscal industrial policy. And Gabriel Galípolo was co-opted by Faria Lima, because he was indicated by Lula. He came there to, you know, and look what he is doing. And it's a pity that Bresser is not here, because in 1973, when he taught me economics here, we are discussing inflação brasileira from Inácio Rangel. There is several ways to fight inflation, right? And I ask you, and you like Keynesian economics, me too. What we learn about economics is not really working anymore in the real sense. Fiscal, Phillips curve, for instance, just a simple example. Therefore, how to combat inflation now without good high interest rates? It's very difficult, and you have to fight inflation. We said, okay, let's let's fight indexation, right? But how? You know, when Arminio Fraga says, first thing, they have to fight against the minimum wage indexed by inflation, etc., etc. Therefore, it's not a question, but some comments that, in my opinion, have to come into the literature about developmentalism. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Antonino Zunino. I'm from Uruguay. So a short comment and a short question. My comment refers to the choice of China as a model for Asia. I really liked your presentation since I'm working on the case, but I would just make a little remark in the sense that perhaps China is not the best case for an export-led strategy in the same sense that we treat Korea or Japan. There's a lot of talk right now about an investment-led label for the Chinese path rather than export-led because of the public share of investment and a change in policy towards innovation since 2006 and 2016, which is not a classical catch-up strategy such as the one that Korea and Japan followed. So I would like maybe to hear your thoughts on that, in the sense that it is well, a sui generis case maybe. And a short political question that also concerns China, but in this sense. In Asia, in general, in the successful cases of Asia, but in China very much, the power of the landlords, the owners of the agrarian traditional elite was eliminated. So they don't have that problem to deal with. So when we talk about learning from Asia in Latin America, I always say the same thing. It is not reproducible here in Latin America, because we have a very big player that trumps our developmentalist strategies politically, as you were saying before, that they don't have to deal with. So that's not a model for us. We're not going to, I don't know, put all of them in jail or kill all of them or whatever. And that raises some... Okay. I will not. That's another thing that you don't have to say until you do it. No, but I mean, I would honestly like to hear your thoughts on that one too, because that's also a problem for the democracy debate that we were having before with Professor Bresser. Like, what do we do with that? Just that. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. This is a really fascinating panel. And I want to actually just add to Antonino's question, because China, if we go back a decade, in the 1990s, it was heavily foreign investment-led expansion. Yes? And so we have to remember that. So it's part of the Poland type thing in that period. You know, it was relocative investment. But also because China begins its reforms with a relatively egalitarian society. I know Bresser is not here, but you know, it matters. It matters because you get economies of scale. And it's those economies of scale which, when you industrialize, you're already getting massive benefits from the domestic market, which allow you to produce much more cheaply. Unequal societies like Brazil or India, we don't have that advantage because we have suppressed our domestic incomes and wages. So I think there's another angle to this, or another dimension, which is it's not just about investment, it's about also whether the private investment will respond if you have sufficient domestic incentives through economies of scale. So, also because, you know, I don't know if there's a very clear distinction between an export-led growth model and the other one. It's the second one is a financial investment-led model, and I think that's what's wrong with it. The other one relied on FDI, export-led with import protection. So I think that's also very important. It was the trade part is missing, but you know, it was export-led, but with very strong import protection for both China and all the other East Asian developmental states. Thanks.
Thank you. One more. And then thank you. I think my comment is going to be right to what they both said. I actually wrote it down that comparing these three developing countries will not actually give us what the FAT says. I'm not sure if my English is very clear. Yes. Yes, so it will not give us what the FAT says. Considering that they have different economic system. The Chinese, they have different economic system. I don't want to mention it. Geographical location totally differs. Then colonial history. Like China is not colonized. Compared to when you talk about Brazil, because those are things we look at when you are looking at export-led hypothesis theory. You have to look at the geographical location, the colonial history, and every other thing related to it. Then resource endowment differs in these three countries. Like, I don't know, then the governance and institution for these three nations differs completely. Then the human capital available. Why do I say human capital? Because you use GDP per capita as the measure of your dependent variable. That means the population of each of these countries determines whatever result you get. And China has over 1-point-something billion, relative to Brazil of maybe 200, Poland less than. So I think finally, I would want you to examine similar countries that have the same homogeneous factor and analyze to move forward from there. Thank you. I'm Kafila Gold. I think I'm the only African here. Thank you.
What country?
I came from University of Johannesburg, South Africa, but I'm a Nigerian.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's for me. Okay, many thanks for the very interesting questions, but I prefer to stand up. Okay, I do not like to talk seated. Well, in order to make a first general answer to all the three questions posed, I'm a very Caldorian in my approach to economic development. Which means that, first, I believe that economic growth is demand-led. And Calder, on the end of his life, he made an extension of Keynes' principle of effective demand to the long run. And as we know, Keynes distinguished between autonomous demand and induced demand. For an open economy, Calder says, the sources of autonomous demand are two: exports and government expenditures, because consumption is induced by real income and investment by the growth of real income because of the Harrod's acceleration principle. So it's working. I'm not well. So if you have this perspective on your head, so development can be led by exports or government expenditures. Well, I wrote an article on Brazilian Journal of Political Economy, now a very mathematical model to analyze in which conditions we can have government-led growth or export-led growth. Investment is just induced demand. So, for a stable, steady state to be reached, you have to have both government expenditures and exports to grow at the same rate. If exports grow at a rate higher than government expenditures, well, basically the country will run increasing surplus on current account and increase surplus on fiscal account. And the other way around, if you try to lead economic development by government expenditures, then, which is the case, for instance, of Brazil now, that the growth that we had is led by government expenditures, what we will see is an increasing current account deficit and an increasing fiscal deficit. So it is the model says, and I think that this conclusion is fitted by the facts. So it's my first general answer. The second answer is that I do not have the intention to present here a paper. I present a narrative. Okay. Of course, all these questions that you posed of geography, differences on governance, so on and so forth, are important. And in a fully developed econometric model, all of these have to be taken in consideration. But I use the China case because, you know, China is when one talk about a successful development model in Asia, everybody thinks about China. I think that 20 years ago will be South Korea. 30 years ago will be Japan. But now the China is the rising star of Asia, and the rising star as a very successful economic model. And regarding the differences in income distribution, I perfectly agree that societies that had a more equal income distribution had advantages in economic development, not only because economies of scale, they are important, but society with a more equal income distribution, you have a deeper sense of nationality, of belong to a country, and I think that it makes easier for political coalitions to be formed and to be sustained through time. So I think that it is really important. And regarding to your comments, I'm perfectly aware that Brazil needs to tax the exports of primary products. I do not told here because this is a primary, the agribusiness, yes, the agribusiness. Not exports. So, okay, so you are telling more or less what Ronaldo Caiado made at Goiás. He made tax on the production of soybeans in Goiás. Ah, okay. Well, this I think I cannot suggest because my wife had some lands and so. My wife also my wife. So I cannot speak at home. Okay, but just to end the idea of investment-led growth. Yes, in China, investment in infrastructure is very important, but you see, if the growth of China was led only by investment in infrastructure, it will not be sustainable in terms of current account. So exports are very important. My idea is this one. Consider a plane. In order for a plane to take off, you need engines. Okay? The engines are the exports. But in order to sustain the plane flying, we need investment, because if investment do not follow exports, so you sooner or later will face a shortage of capital, which means that the development strategy becomes unsustainable. That's it.
Thank you. André? I'd like to add some comments about the very, I could say, discussed export-led strategy. I don't quite agree with Oreiro too, because it's okay? Okay. Because I think that I define export-led growth as a process in which, like South Korea, the export indeed is the main driver of economic growth and investment and so on, because of the size of the country, etc. I think that the more important from the Keynesian point of view is that investment is driven by demand. It doesn't matter if demand is internal or external. So, from my point of view, the basic point is that there is a difference between export-led growth and, indeed, I would agree with Oreiro. It's because from the Caldorian point of view and Tyrrell point of view, it's important that export, for a developing country especially, that the growth of export is marginally above the growth of import to avoid external constraints to go. Thank you.
I think we have time for more questions. Yes, Tiago there.
Thanks, Fabrício. My question goes to André, and actually it's very connected to what you just said. I missed in your presentation, which was great, two things. One was the role of the domestic market, because you stressed that this very well in our recent book, Development and Stagnation, which is very related to the point you just made. I mean, maybe depending on the size of the country, you don't need to be export-led. You need a current account more or less positive or stable. And this is connected also with income distribution, right? In Brazil, we have two very different cases, one in which we had structural change without income distribution, and then we had a case of income distribution with the industrialization without structural change. And the most difficult challenge is how we make them together, because it's the only way that it's sustainable. And this connects, I think it also connects a lot with Professor Aidar points on how to tackle inflation within the framework we are proposing, because one variable that is used a lot to tackle inflation is the exchange rate, right? So the exchange rate populism is using valorized currency to tackle inflation. So I think it's very important to discuss two things. So one is mechanism that is not monetary high interest rates to tackle inflation, and second, income distribution or policies for income distribution that are also positively affects competitiveness. So many people are talking now about public goods, or it's not public goods. Yeah, I missed the word, but I can explain. So, what Lula did a lot in his first government was increasing wages and distributing income. Now he's trying different forms of distribution, right? The tax policies and so on and so forth. For example, tax policies, it increases competitiveness and distributing income at the same time. So what are these policies that we can foster distribution with maintaining a competitive of the productive sector? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tiago. Good morning. Não tiver, trocamos.
Good morning, good morning to all. My name is Leonardo, and I have two questions. The first one addressed to Professor André and Oreiro, and the second addressed to Professor Eliane. The first question is if you consider the future exchange rate in your policy relations, in your policy linkages. And why I ask that, because I think that maybe just make inflation target policy a little bit more flexible, or capital controls cannot be enough. And that's because in Brazil specifically, future exchange rates influence spot exchange rates. That usually creates this overshooting of interest rates, all the fiscal problems and all the implications discussed by Professor Oreiro in this scenario. And for Professor Eliane, I have a question if her econometric model consider or not the public savings as a variable. And I ask that because usually in orthodox theory, the external savings are actually not that important because they admit that external savings can generate a lot of growth if they come in the form of FDI, for direct investment, and related to R&D sectors, research and development sectors. They admit that. And the traditional orthodox models consider that developing economies have two basic problems. Low saving rates, that is disguised in these terms as the intertemporal saving rates, and high natural interest rates. So they believe, and I say believe because there is a lot of strong assumptions to fulfill this hypothesis, is that if you exogenously create public savings, you can overcome these problems. So if the model tests public savings as a variable. Thank you very much.
I just want to highlight one information, one data that in this Oreiro's presentation. If you can put on the presentation just to so everybody can see the numbers.
Where are the presentations here?
Okay. I don't want it to cause that trouble. Well, the question is, if you show the information, the data about the participation of the industry, the manufacturing industry in the GDP, and the manufacturing employment in GDP, compare. In total employment. Okay, so if you compare the two numbers, for the three different countries, and the first one in Brazil, you have this basically the same proportion. It's about around 12%. But if you look at this number in China, you have a very high participation of the industry in GDP than the industry employment in the total employment. And the same, it happens in Poland. Okay, so what I'm saying that this may be addressing to a problem of productivity. Yes. You have that's for me. It's clear that although we have all this kind of problem that you guys told us, but we have in the basic of the production a problem of productivity in manufacturing sector. That's my point. I want to stress.
I think you can start to.
Okay, thank you for your question. Actually, we have a kind of economic growth equation. So we included the investment as an explanatory variable. So include saving and investment together. It's not good because the idea is that investment is equal total saving, and the total saving is public saving, also private saving, and external saving. So we included the other side that was investment. So we didn't include public saving, that is the fiscal results. But it is an idea. Maybe we can change from, instead of using investment, we can use saving and put this different kind of saving. Thank you for your question, but we decide to put investment, so include the saving together. I think it's not good. Thanks.
Well, I'll try to answer my question, Tiago. I think that first, I don't think that there is an opposition between the role of domestic market and export. But in the case of Brazil, especially due to the size of internal market and given that Brazil is has been for more than 4 decades stagnated, of course, the main driver would be the investment, physical investment, innovation, so based on the internal market, because in this case we would have to change structurally the economy and the trade pattern in such a way to construct and building manufacturing competitiveness of exports. So, but at the same size, I agree with the income distribution could help to do this. For example, in the case of Brazil, I used to say that the dream of Celso Furtado has not been realized until nowadays, because there is a high inequality, the regional inequality between the Northeast and the Southeast. I think that it would be important as a policy to boost, for example, not reindustrialization, but industrialization in the Northeast regions. And so also, I don't believe that it's important to fight against the high inequality in Brazil, social political transfers and programs of the government to the poor, etc., tax policy. But I think that the most important long-term policy should be the boost of investment, especially boost of public investment in order to boost total investment and to contribute to economic growth and the increase of labor productivity in Brazil. So I could say that, but at the same time, given that the high social inequality in Brazil, in which 1% of population captures almost 30% of total income, I think that it's not only an economic problem, but it's a political and social problem. I used to say that I don't believe that I would be radical without such revolution, we could change the things really. And I agree that, of course, the exchange rate, nominal exchange rate in Brazil, it's quite, if not almost totally determined by the future market. So what I mean is that it's important Brazil introduce what I used to call for a mix of exchange rate instrument combining intervention in the spot market, future market, etc. But it's interesting because even intervention in the spot market could stabilize it exchange rate in Brazil. We had an example last year when the central bank stabilized the nominal exchange rate in Brazil in this, by intervention in the spot market. Yes, I think that's all. Thank you.
Well, I always prefer to speak on my feet. Regarding the question of the influence of future exchange rates on the current level of exchange rate, this is not the problem only related to exchange rate. In the case of interest rates, you have exactly the same problem. For instance, the relation, how the relation between long-term interest rate and short-term interest rate, and how the long-term interest rate influences the short-term interest rate. Well, specifically this case, I have described it on my book, chapter 4, but, well, making an analogy, in the case of interest rate, the long-term interest rate is the weighted average of the current level short-term interest rate and the future expected levels of short-term interest rate plus a liquidity premium. So the question is, how these expectations of short-term interest rate are formed? Well, according to Keynesian theory, they are determined by what Keynes called the safe rate of interest. And how the safe rate of interest is determined and what it is basically the conventions that the financial markets had about the future of interest rates. So, the central bank can influence the long-term interest rate if it uses wisely the short rate, the monetary policy. So the central bank can influence the long-term rate managing the short-term rate. Well, the same idea can be applied to the exchange rate market, because the future exchange rate don't come for nothing. It's basically the expectations of the financial agents that operate an exchange rate market about the future of exchange rate. And since they are expectations that are based on the conventions that the exchange rate market have about the behavior of exchange rate. These conventions are socially formed. And so the central bank can influence the expectations of future exchange rate by means of many mechanisms, capital controls, or even interventions on the future or current exchange rate market. So I think that is perfectly possible for a central bank to intervene and to manage the exchange rate if the central bank had the will and the instruments necessary to make the job. The problem here in Brazil is that the central bank do not longer have the instruments. As I told in the presentation of Bresser, the last wave of financial liberalization during Bolsonaro government basically destroyed the last tools that we have to manage the exchange rate. And even if the central bank now had the instruments to do the job, it's very clear that it does not have the will to do the job. So that's it.
So I think I close this section. It was a wonderful time, so thank you for our presentation. Now you have a lunch, and I hope I can see you in the afternoon. You have directions.
Yeah. So we can walk everybody together. We are in the 4th floor. We have to go to the 7th floor, and then when we get out FGV, we turn to the right, and it's in the corner.
Tiago, aí eu falei, pô, já tinha feito